From the Evening Standard in London, I'm David Marsland, and this is The Leader.
These allegations that were put yesterday and repeated by the Right Honourable Gentleman are serious allegations, and I welcome the opportunity to come to the House to put formally on the record that these unsubstantiated allegations around honesty are not true.
Health Secretary Matt Hancock insisting he's no liar in the Commons after taking hit after hit from Dominic Cummings, the former number 10 advisor, who said Mr Hancock should have been fired 15 to 20 times during the pandemic.
Every day since I began working on the response to this pandemic last January, I've got up each morning and asked, what must I do to protect life? That is the job of a health secretary in a pandemic. We've taken an approach of openness, transparency, and explanation of both what we know and of what we don't know.
It was a defiant performance, welcomed by some of Mr Hancock's Conservative colleagues in the House, like Peter Bone.
Yesterday we had some outrageous claims by an unelected spad who broke COVID regulations, admitted he'd leaked stuff to the BBC, and by his own admission wasn't fit to be in number 10 Downing Street. Mr Speaker, would the Secretary of State agree with me the only mistake the Prime Minister made in this pandemic is he didn't fire Dominic Cummings early enough?
But does the Health Secretary have the support of everyone in his party? And what about some of those other allegations raised by Dominic Cummings? The PM has said some of the commentary doesn't bear any relation to reality. Our Deputy Political Editor Nicholas Cecil is here. Nicholas, starting with Matt Hancock, he's not taking those attacks by Dominic Cummings lying down, is he?
This morning, the Health Secretary gave a statement to the House of Commons, and there he was clear in rejecting these allegations. He said these unsubstantiated allegations around honesty are not true. He also then highlighted that the coronavirus pandemic was unprecedented in modern times, and although there had been difficulties, the preparations needed were also unprecedented. But this falls short of what people might expect, and there's a growing view that mistakes were made and that this may have cost a significant number of lives. Is
Mr Hancock's position secure right now?
I don't think any immediate threat to Mr Hancock's position, partly that if Mr Johnson were to sack the Health Secretary, then he'd have another potential enemy at Westminster. Also, Mr Hancock, if he's getting all the criticism, will act as a lightning rod for the Prime Minister and may deflect some of the criticism from him.
And he's very much trying to sow seeds of doubt in the public's mind about whether much, if any, of Dominic Cummings' testimony yesterday was true. Has there been any developments at all to back up anything that he said yesterday?
The other development this morning was that we had two of Britain's leading COVID experts, Professor Neil Ferguson from Imperial College London and Professor John Edmunds from the London School of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene. And they both gave some backing to Mr Cummings' claim that tens of thousands of lives were probably unnecessarily lost in this pandemic due to slow action in ordering lockdowns.
And Dominic Cummings gave as a reason for some of those deaths things like failings in care home policies. Now, that's something that the Evening Standard wrote a lot about at the time, isn't it, Nicholas? And it's probably something we can expect to hear a lot more about in the future.
Yes, certainly on care homes. Mr Hancock insisted that a protective ring had been put around care homes. The number 10 advisor, Mr Cummings, dismissed that as complete nonsense. And the key issue here is, were patients being discharged from hospital into care homes without being tested for coronavirus? And it very much looks like that was happened, and that would have led to some infection being taken into care homes where there are a high number of very vulnerable individuals. You've got to remember that obviously this was at the time of the first wave hitting an unprecedented crisis. So it was extraordinary times, yet the government gave these assurances that care homes were being protected, and there's a very big question mark over whether that is true.
So the Health Secretary appears to be holding on to his job. The Prime Minister appears to be dismissing what Dominic Cummings said. Will any of that testimony yesterday to the Science and Health Committees have any impact? Did any of those so-called truth bombs that Dominic Cummings gave actually land?
Well, one very interesting issue will be what the then Cabinet Secretary Sir Mark Sedwill has got to say on this. Mr Cummings claimed that Sir Mark, now Lord Sedwill, had, quote, lost confidence in the Secretary of State's honesty and had urged the Prime Minister to sack him. Mr Johnson yesterday rejected that and denied that. But at some point, either this committee or another committee will hear from Sir Mark, Lord Sedwill, and those questions will be put to him. And Cabinet Secretaries have got a phenomenal ability not to answer questions, but it will be very interesting to see what he has got to say on those points. The other issue is how much this actually cut through to the wider general public. And so far, lots of controversies around Mr Johnson have not cut through to the general public. For example, over his flat, voters generally don't seem to be too bothered about that. The pandemic may be slightly different, and certainly, for example, with the vaccine programme, the Prime Minister definitely got a bounce which helped him in the local elections. The public are probably more forgiving than critics at Westminster of the government's handling of the COVID crisis. But the more these claims continue to arrive, the greater the problem that will be for the government.
And meanwhile, the battle against COVID-19 continues, and there have been some developments in that today as well, haven't there?
Professor Ferguson this morning said that the Indian variant, the B1617.2 mutation, was now the dominant strain in Britain. So first we had the virus, the strain which had arrived from China. That was overtaken by the Kent variant in the second wave, and now the Kent variant has been overtaken by the Indian variant, according to Professor Ferguson. He is predicting that there will be a surge in the disease levels fueled by the Indian variant, which may even develop into a small third wave. And the two key questions are, do these extra cases translate into more hospitalisations and deaths, and on what scale in particular, and also whether the NHS can cope with any rise in the disease.
And that's The Leader. Join us again tomorrow at 4 p.m. Hit your follow button to make sure you don't miss out.